I've played a lot of fighting games. Trying to remember all of them can be a challenge, but on today's episode of Weird Fighting Games, I'm returning to a game that many haven't played. A game that I sunk countless hours into as a kid. A game that has been forgotten to time. A game that I and the people who've played it have never forgotten. It's not Fighters Megamix. It's Episode 8, Sonic the Fighters. Welcome to Weird Fighting Games. It's the 1990s, the golden age of arcades and fighting games. At the time, Sega was at the top of their game with classics like Daytona USA, The House of the Dead, and most importantly, Virtua Fighter. Developed by the legendary AM2, Virtua Fighter is not only an important fighting game, but also an important game, period, as it was the first arcade game to feature 3D polygonal graphics. Needless to say, it was a smash hit. Thanks to its success, AM2 were able to make another 3D fighter in 1995, Fighting Vipers, a criminally underrated fighting game. During the development of Fighting Vipers, an unnamed developer added Sonic and Tails during his spare time, and the head of AM2, Yu Suzuki, most known for the Shenmue series, took notice and decided to show that developer's little passion project to the one, the only, creator of Balan Wonderworld, Yuji Naka. He liked the idea so much he pushed for a Sonic fighter to be created, and, well, before they knew it, AM2 was making Sonic the Fighters, and in 1996, the game was let loose in arcades. Outside of Japanese arcades, the game was called Sonic Championship, but everyone calls it Sonic the Fighters nowadays. A Sega Saturn port was planned, but never materialized, and the game would remain arcade exclusive until the release of the Sonic Gems collection in 2005. A collection that featured more obscure Sonic games like Sonic R and Sonic CD. This is how most, including myself, first got a chance to play Sonic the Fighters. Interestingly enough, on the Gems collection, it's not straight emulation, but a pseudo port. At first, I thought this might have been the cancelled Sega Saturn port. Upon closer inspection, it seems like Sega used their existing arcade emulator they used for other similar arcade ports on the PS2, made a special version of Sonic the Fighters with its own UI and options, and then slapped it into the Gems collection. The game would then be ported to PS3 and Xbox 360 in 2012 with online support, and this is the version all of my footage comes from, as well as the version most people play today. Sonic the Fighters has a pretty standard plot. Dr. Eggman is back with a brand new space station that he'll use to conquer the world, and it's up to Sonic and friends to stop him. So, they should all be working together, but it's a fighting game, it's never that simple. The rocket they can use to reach Eggman has only one seat and requires 8 K.O.S emeralds to power. So everyone has to fight for that chance to lay the smackdown on Eggman. That's it. There aren't even any character endings, which is pretty disappointing. The graphics in this game are a product of its time, and I mean that in the best way possible. Sonic the Fighters was made in the era where 3D graphics were in their infancy, and despite the primitive looking 3D models, it captures the look of Sonic and his world perfectly. All of the characters are so expressive, which is something most 3D games wouldn't be able to reliably pull off until the PlayStation 2 generation. I'd argue that the primitive look gives it a distinctive art style that really sticks out, even if that wasn't intentional. If you've ever made anything, I think you can agree with me that the best stuff you make is made when you have restrictions in place, and that it's harder to create something when you have total freedom. And I feel like that's what happened here with Sonic the Fighters, although I may be overthinking it. The animations in this game go hand in hand with the graphics and are just as good, if not better. For big attacks, body parts will grow large to convey just how powerful an attack is. On the other hand, while being hit by said powerful attacks, the models stretch and contort to really sell the impact. My personal favorite is when Sonic does the clap attack and the opponent's head is just flattened like a pancake. It reminds me of classic Tom and Jerry cartoons. The cherry on top that ties everything together is the ring effect that occurs every time someone gets hit. It's purely cosmetic, but it is oh so satisfying, and I never get sick of it. Of course, it's another little detail that just adds to this game's sonicness. Oh, and I almost forgot, if you KO your opponent with a launching attack, you can launch them over the stage and send them flying. Words alone cannot express how insanely satisfying it is to do this. Because Sonic the Fighters never got a proper home release, the only modes it has are arcade and versus, but that's really all you need to play a fighting game. In arcade mode, you fight 8 opponents back to back, but in this game, you always fight the same 8 opponents, which gets repetitive after a couple runs. I will give them credit though, whenever you reach the same character you're playing as, Dr. Eggman will come in and use this ray to clone them and they become a black and white version, thus letting you have the mirror match. It's a really nice detail, and again, more Sonicness.
I am a shadow, the true self.
All of the characters you'd expect to be in a Sonic game at the time are here. Knuckles, Tails, Amy, and of course, Sonic the Hedgehog himself. Each can use their trademark abilities. Tails can fly and spin, Knuckles can glide, Sonic is the master of the spin dash, and Amy Rose can, At this point in the franchise, Amy hadn't done much besides getting kidnapped in Sonic's CD and drive a car. So the developers had to think outside of the box for this one. If Sonic can spin, Tails can fly, and Knuckles can glide, what can Amy do? Why, beat people up with a giant hammer, of course. That's right, Amy's trademark weapon comes from Sonic the Fighters. Outside of the mentioned characters, there really weren't many other Sonic characters outside of the various comics, which Sega hasn't ever really been keen on referencing in their games. So AM2 had to do some reaching when filling out the roster. From the Game Gear games, we've got Knack the Weasel or Fang the Sniper, depending on where you're from. He serves as a secondary antagonist to Eggman most of the time, but not this time. This time, he's got that mad scientist in his sights. Fang is unique because he has a gun, years before Shadow the Hedgehog. Yes, it's a cork gun, but a gun is a gun. If you've ever been shot with a cork gun, it can be surprisingly painful. Not like injury painful, but like the feeling you get when you get hit by a rubber band, very inconvenient. Espio is from the Sega 32X game Knuckles Chaotix. He's purple. That's about it for Espio. The other 2 characters are original characters made for Sonic the Fighters. Bean the Dynamite and Bark the Polar Bear. Bark is your classic fighting game big body, slow but powerful with devastating grabs. Bean, on the other hand, is all about using bombs and his beak to fight. I always thought he looked like a green Woody Woodpecker. Technically, he's not an original character because he's the child of a character from a Sega arcade game, Dynamite Ducks, but you'd never know that unless I told you, so it doesn't matter. Lastly, Metal Sonic and Eggman are the 2 unplayable boss characters, although there is technically one more character, or should I say, transformation. If you beat all 8 opponents without losing a match, as Sonic, during the Metal Sonic and Eggman fights, Sonic can become Super Sonic. Unfortunately, this is the only way to play Supersonic, which I guess is fine because he is very overpowered. That's about everything when it comes to characters, unless I'm forgetting something. Honey the Cat is by far this game's most interesting character. Since Sonic the Fighters was developed by the same team who made Fighting Vipers, the developers decided it would be cool to take a character from that game and put it in this one. Although, it would be weird for a human to be in a Sonic game, so they took Honey from Fighting Vipers, turned her into a cat, and they didn't make her playable. She was still accessible by hacking the game and was first discovered when data mining the Sonic Gems collection, but in a surprising turn, she was put back into the game in the 2012 re-release and can be selected by pressing select on Amy. And you know, I'm glad she is, because I really like her design, and she's basically a crossover character and an original character at the same time. I mean, what more could you want from a fighting game character? The combat in this game is very easy to pick up. You've got a punch, a kick, a block, and grabs. Like a lot of fighters at the time, this game has two control schemes, manual and automatic. Manual is regular controls, while automatic is a simpler control scheme for beginners. However, automatic has way more advantages than manual, such as one-frame grabs and one-frame special moves, which are context sensitive, meaning that the game will grab if it can, but attack if it can't, all in one frame. It's really unfair and is banned in competitive play. There aren't many command inputs in the move list, and characters tend to share certain moves. Combos are pretty simple too, but not always guaranteed, as it seems that you can tech roll out of a lot of stuff by design. There are also OTG, or on the ground attacks, you can use to squeeze out a little bit of extra damage from a knockdown. Punches are good for breaking barriers, but seem unsafe and can be sidestepped, or in some cases, interrupted by kicks. Kicks are a little safer, but don't usually break barriers unless it's a special input. And grabs are the best of both worlds, breaking barriers and doing loads of damage, but if ducked or sidestepped, leave you extremely vulnerable. It was refreshing to pick up this game and just play it. The core gameplay is easy to understand, and the movesets aren't bloated with a ton of moves like other 3D fighters. When you think of a Sonic the Hedgehog fighting game, what is the one criteria you think it would have to meet? Well, Sonic is fast, so of course, his fighting game has to be fast. Sonic the Fighters definitely delivers on that in multiple ways. Rounds are super short in this game at a blistering fast 30 seconds per round, encouraging players to get in there and fight, but this isn't the only thing that pushes this game towards the fast lane. Being a 3D fighter, there's a big emphasis on dodging left and right to approach and avoid attacks. You can even use the wall to your advantage by jumping off of it or using it as another avenue of attack. However, the most unique and by far interesting mechanic in this game has to be how it handles one of the most fundamental aspects of any fighter, blocking. You definitely must have noticed by now the barrier meter. Unlike every other fighting game I've played, blocking in Sonic the Fighters is a limited resource that has to be managed. A blue barrier protects your character when blocking, and these barriers can be broken by strong attacks or throws. Once broken, you lose one stock of barrier, and if you lose all of your stocks, you lose the ability to block completely. Sonic the Fighters sends a clear message that you can't play defensively forever, and you have to go on the offensive, or else. Oh, and did I mention that you get 6 stocks per game, not per round? That may seem very unfair, but thankfully, there are safety measures in place. Your opponent can't just melee you to death if you run out of barrier. Still, I have to respect the developers for being so bold and introducing something that goes against fighting game conventions. What's even crazier is that there's another mechanic that uses barrier and encourages even more aggressive play. Hyper Mode. Hyper Mode, activated by pressing back plus punch and kick, briefly powers up your character for a short amount of time, decreasing the recovery of your attacks, and prevents you from breaking barriers with normal attacks. After each activation, you have to wait a couple seconds to use it again to prevent spamming. Hyper Mode lets you launch a blistering attack after blistering attack, but this power comes at a cost. One barrier. This creates an interesting meter management dilemma. Do you save your barrier for Hyper Mode, or maybe you should try to conserve barrier by dodging at the risk of getting hit? I've never seen anything like this in another fighting game. The closest thing I can think of is Guard Break / Guard Crush from Street Fighter and the King of Fighters. But at the very least, when you're guard broken, you don't lose the ability to block. I can imagine how controversial a mechanic like this would be if it was in a modern fighter like Tekken or Soul Calibur. But surprisingly, it works well here. I can't put my finger on it, but the way the mechanic is integrated into the core gameplay just makes things super exciting, giving the game a pace fitting for a Sonic the Hedgehog fighter. In my research for this episode, I tried to find if this game had any tournament presence in the past, and as far as I can tell, the game never really got any competitive traction in the traditional sense. It makes sense though. It came out during a very competitive time in fighting games, and it's not the easiest game to play through official channels. It's no surprise Sonic the Fighters isn't the most popular game out there. However, thanks to the digital age we're living in, almost any game can be supported thanks to its online community, and that's no exception for Sonic the Fighters. In a Weird Fighting Games First, I got the opportunity to interview 2 community members and asked them 10 questions about the game, its meta, and even some community lore. Starting off my interviews, I had the chance to talk with MysticNoodle, a skilled player who knows a thing or two about the game's mechanics. How did you get into Sonic the Fighters? When I was 6, my family used to rent the Sonic OVA, but we had to return it. I was a huge fan of Metal Sonic at the time, so the next time I went to Blockbuster with my dad, we couldn't find it, but found the Sonic Gems collection instead, which featured Metal Sonic on the front. That's how I got a taste of blood. Why do you play Sonic the Fighters? What makes it fun for you? The mechanics remind me a lot of actual classic Sonic games, which is why I'd say this game did a really good job translating Sonic into a fighting game, both as a character and mechanics. It's artistic to me, and being an artist myself, I get lost in that. Also, parkouring around with fighting game inputs feels good. Can you tell me anything about the community, history, strong players, etc.? In the beginning, I don't know much other than it was a pure Wild West time. Nobody jumped, PK'd, dodge abuse. I'm Porky from Mother 3. I polluted it all. There was Gamma Crackers and Matt Beach. They played Knuckles and Tails. They were really skilled. K.O.S. was there too, and just like today's time, K.O.S. and I are still pushing the meta. As for before my time, other than K.O.S., there hasn't been another hero. I mean, I kinda wish someone would just save the day already, you know? Did the community form because of the 360 and PS3 versions, or were people playing before on something like the Gems collection, or even in the arcade? I want to say it was because of the HD ports, because when I joined, it was all fixated on PlayStation 3. Why are Metal Sonic and Eggman banned? Metal Sonic is impossible to touch, infinites you with laser, and easily times you out by dodging. Dr. Robotonic is currently semi-banned in this time frame, meaning both players have the choice to agree for his legality. Why is it like this for Robotonic? Cause he has loving hitboxes to tuck you into bed within seconds, and with his love taps, it's impossible to counter his inevitable affection. However, Fang and Amy's projectiles can severely put him down. There is no in-between. Only black and white with him. What tools make a character strong in Sonic the Fighters? Spin attacks, punch, kick, ducking, and hyper start/air hyper start. The spin dash for corners, air spin for retaliation, 4 PKs, and your career. Ducking for evasiveness, and hyper start without hyper mode is like melee Fox's shine. How does the limited barrier affect how matches play out? A lot. The strategies of whether you want them or not, or how you condition them with just barrier, is deep. Currently, I am the only one that intentionally burns my barriers to get rid of hyper mode. How important is movement in Sonic the Fighters? Very important. Hopping back evades a lot of attacks, and it's great at spacing. Full jump air kicks can scoop the opponent off the ground. Wall jump off the walls to surprise attack the opponent, or even escape them, or even chain them down to the ground. Wall rocket helps you get closer to the other side. Master all of these and you can abuse the timer in your favor. What makes Sonic the Fighters unique compared to other fighting games? What I think makes it special is how well the stage complements the movement and fighting, with additional expressive and vibrant characters in a 2.5D space. It may be rough around the edges, but I'd argue this is a good start to warm beginners to standard fighting games without overwhelming them too badly. It also has the underlying unique depth if you want more, like Kirby logic. To me, this feels like a real Sonic Cross fighting game, as it got the right pacing, simplicity, and skill reward Sonic was all about back then. That's my opinion anyways. If someone wants to get into Sonic the Fighters, what's the best piece of advice you'd give to a new player? I recommend a keyboard so movement won't come off so awkward, and it helps you react sharper. Start with Sonic, he's the easiest to grasp, and once you explore enough of him, you've learned about 70% of the others, and if possible, please avoid CPUs so you don't judge the game through there. Thanks again to Mystic for giving me the opportunity to interview them. Make sure to give them a follow on their YouTube, Twitter, and DeviantArt, all of which I've linked in the description. Next up, I've got K.O.S. giving me their perspective on Sonic the Fighters. Before I get to the questions though, K.O.S. gave me a rundown of how neutral works in Sonic the Fighters, which I'll paraphrase here. In the mid-range, the game encourages you to use forward step dodge attacks, as they have some of the best reach. Counter-poking in the traditional sense doesn't work, so the use of step is key, shimmying in and out of your and your opponent's effective step attack ranges. For example, Sonic's sidestep spin dash covers a lot of range, tracks, and isn't worth blocking as it will break multiple barriers. The answer to this would be to jump over it, or punish it with skip kicks, a nearly universal jumping kick option. This works because jumping makes you invulnerable to mids and lows. To reiterate, the core loop of Sonic the Fighters is about how each player uses their sidestep. Sidesteps can be beaten by throws, but certain characters can circumvent this and even loop their sidestep pressure, so it's not a binary thing that has one answer. If you're lost, the sidestep is a very important tool that ties directly into the game's flow. With that explained, let's get into the questions. How did you get into Sonic the Fighters? I played the Sonic Gems collection when I was 5. Why do you play Sonic the Fighters? What makes it fun for you? It's a Sonic fighting game. Can you tell me anything about the community, history, strong players, etc.? The game is in its third documented era, after the first being Gizaris matches with his friends in 2006, then a random group of players in the HD version from 2012 to 2015. The best players are me, Matt Beach, MysticNoodle, Polymath, Sentry Spade, Richie M, Restless Dipstick, and Monkey Lozars. Did the community form because of the 360 and PS3 versions, or were people playing before on something like the Gems collection, or even in the arcade? The current community was from Polly and everyone else on the mod team's collective efforts. Why are Metal Sonic and Eggman banned? Metal Sonic is too powerful, and Dr. Robotonic is only okay. They're banned because you can't mirror match, so it ruins parity. What tools make a character strong in Sonic the Fighters? Good sidestep normals and advantage state, which is why Sonic and Knuckles don't lose any matchups. How does the limited barrier affect how matches play out? It means that you can make risky hyper plays to try to close out a round, but if you happen to lose the next couple of rounds, you have less defensive leeway. It's a massive oversimplification, but is easier in play. How important is movement in Sonic the Fighters? Very, very important. In this current meta, it's all about jumping and wall movement. You can't reasonably control how one moves on the walls. You have to call out a specific movement pattern, but they're polarizing to deal with. What makes Sonic the Fighters unique compared to other fighting games? The amazing art style and squash and stretch hurtboxes. It's also a Sonic fighting game. If someone wants to get into Sonic the Fighters, what's the best piece of advice you'd give to a new player? Probably just play as often as they can. The situational awareness in this game is almost as obtuse as any other 3D fighting game. And again, another huge thank you to K.O.S for humoring my questions. You can find them on their Tumblr, which I've linked in the description. Also in the description is the link to the Sonic the Fighters community Discord. They've got a ton of resources for new players and are extremely friendly, and if it wasn't for their Discord, I would have never gotten these interviews. So if you got an itch for some Sonic the Fighters, that is the place to be. Again, link in the description. Oh, and I also got to shout out AL from the Fighters Discord, who pointed me in the direction of the two interviewees, so big ups to him. Sonic the Fighters is a product of its time, a window into what 3D fighters used to be. Despite its obscurity, it's still an interesting part of Sonic's history. Even if the game is decades old at this point, I still think it's worth giving a try for its easy to pick up gameplay and charming graphics. Oh, and if you're a Sonic fan, you should play this game. It's pure, unadulterated soul in fighting game form. Sonic the Fighters shows that no matter the circumstances, any fighter can have a community as long as the people are passionate about it. Even so, Sonic the Fighters is a weird fighting game. Thanks for watching.